Hello, hello. Nice to see your faces again this week.
Hey, buddy.
Hey.
We've got Rob, we've got Katie, we've got RhiAnnon back in the fold, and
Ooh,
this is
ooh.
the Mass Exposure presented by the Mass Exodus. And today we're continuing on our journey of the 12 steps, a step a meeting, a step a discussion. Today is the third discussion, which means we're on the third step. And today I have the pleasure of presenting that step to you guys, talking about my experience a little bit.
Can I interrupt really quick?
Sure.
You said the mass exposure presented by the mass exodus. Why don't we just keep on adding on? It can be the 12 steps presented by the mass exposure presented by the mass exodus.
Okay, you want this to eventually. Okay, I got to remember this.
Yeah,
So this is the mass exodus
the 12 steps.
showcasing the mass exposure, which we're now presenting the 12 steps for your beautiful ears to listen to.
I love it.
And
Good job, buddy.
thanks. Thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to start out. I dusted off my wonderful big book for you religious folks. That's not the Bible. That's our little big blue book that is showcased in the Alcoholics Anonymous kind of sobriety space. And I wanted to kind of read the third step again for everyone to kind of jog our memories, but then also read a little excerpt from the actual book.
Cool.
So the step that we covered last week, which you'll probably have heard by now, was came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And then we move on to made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And I'm not going to say anything about the God thing because we will get there eventually. That is something that we will discuss.
Oh, I thought you were going to say we're not going to mention it all in this episode.
Nope, we're not going to talk about God ever.
Yeah. Any little bit of the mass exodus God thing we can put in there, let's keep doing that because we've turned into a psychological therapy podcast that has nothing to do with the mass exodus anymore.
We're not going to talk about God at all.
Yeah.
So, all right, here's the little bit of reading that I'm going to do. It says, the first requirement for the third step is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, and the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, he is more likely to have varied traits. What usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes, on the next occasion, still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he not really a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages it well? Is it not evident to all the rest of the players that these are the things that he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching up all they can out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Our actor is self-centered, egocentric, as people like to call it nowadays. He's like the retired businessman who lolls in the Florida sunshine in the winter, complaining of the sad state of the nation. The minister who sighs over the sins of the 20th century, politicians and reformers who are sure all would be utopia if the rest of the world would only behave. The outlaw safecracker who thinks society has wronged him, and the alcoholic who has lost all will and is now locked up. Whatever our protestations, are not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, or our self-pity? And this is the part where I wanted to really highlight. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they do retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation, but invariably find that at some time in the past we have made decisions based on self, which have later placed us in a position to be hurt. So the troubles we think are basically of our own making. So this step for me, the third step, was has a lot to do with the convincing yourself of the fact that we cannot be in control of our own lives anymore, and that whatever malady that we are have succumbed to isn't necessarily an organic thing that puts us into a victim space that's truthful. We're not victims in our own lives. And so when I came to this step, the first part of it is decided to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Decided to turn our lives and our will and lives. Now, how do you decide on something without, knowing the implications of not doing the very thing that you're trying to decide to do? And that was what this whole step, that whole little bit of reading was a bit of an example running through in quick, succession to try and understand why we are the way we are and that we play a part in it. So in this step, it's a two piece. Convincing ourselves that we no longer can run the show. And secondly, what we can expect if we were to turn it over to something that we can't yet maybe describe, or maybe don't yet understand fully, or maybe have a preconception based off of our upbringing or of our young adulthood in a religion or non-religion. So it's a two-part thing. I don't really have a direction to move forward with this discussion, other than maybe we can discuss where we've seen our self-righteousness and self-will creep into our daily lives, and where we've started to kind of get a glimpse that maybe we're the root of our problems, and how we might use that as fuel to help us make that decision moving forward to turn our will and lives over to something else.
Just for clarity, and this is very opinion based, but I do want to put it out there that there's a difference between selfishness and self-care. I think sometimes, especially in my church experience, you take all of that and throw it out, and then there's no self-care happening. So the idea of self being in the definition of something isn't necessarily wrong, because we do need to have self-care. Does that make sense to you guys? Because I think a lot of people who read that, especially if they come from a religious place, might throw that concept out.
I totally agree with that. I think that probably is stated the way it is because the symptoms of the issue, the symptoms of selfishness might be causing, or are in the big book's eyes, from what I understand, are causing the malady. And if we are selfless, the issues around needing self-care dissolve organically. That's what my understanding of the big book was. I'm not saying that self-care is not necessary or needed or should be delineated. I definitely do think that, because later on in the big book they talk about, hey, this program, these steps might not cure everything. You might need a doctor. You might need a practitioner. So I agree. Yes, you. I would say you are correct.
Thank you.
Selfishness is not is not does not mean that you can't focus on yourself.
Okay, cool. Thanks for letting me put that on the table.
I wanted to say one thing really quick. I didn't necessarily see my part in this step as much as the fourth step. That was when the mirror appeared for me. So I'm like, oh, I don't want to talk too much about the fourth step while we're talking about the third step, because I feel like when I was turning my will and my life over to the care of God, it was still, as I understood him, you could call him Harold, the
Right.
universe. Harold be thy name. HP, whatever you want to call him, Harry Potter. It. I don't like him. They, she, it.
Right.
Pronouns. But I still didn't fully see myself. I knew that this step was reminding me that I'm not the fixer of people and I'm not in control. I can't be responsible for other people's feelings or how they think of me or happiness. I don't need to. I started to see that I'm a people pleaser and it's selfish, and I can still get stuck in those places of shoulding on myself and shoulding on other people, of like, I know better. Like, what? No, I don't. I don't. I barely knew better for myself coming into this. But so this was a massive lesson in trust, discipline, patience. I did not have any patience, and just relinquishing that control.
The thing that all three of you use that I focus on here is the word control. I think it's our human nature to always want to try to control our scenarios. We want to know the outcome, or I should say, I'm going to use I statements here. I want to know the outcome. I think of 3, 4, 5 different scenarios down the road on how this is going to work out. So I'm prepared for everything. So that decision, and I appreciate that word too, because it's a conscious effort. And Katie, you also use the word discipline. It's a discipline to choose to make this decision to release that control. And I don't think that it's not easy, and it's not something that you do once and poof, it happens for the rest of your life. These steps, as we go through them, I'm still coming back to, these are all things that continuously take work and thought process and the decision to move forward with them. But the thing that I focus on 3 is, and step 3 doesn't say control, but control is a big thing. As a people pleaser, as a perfectionist, it's really hard to let go of that kind of control. I don't ever think of myself as a controlling person. Like, I'm not trying to control my friends or other people, but I want to have a certain amount. Touche. I want to have a certain amount of control of the decisions and the path that my life is taking. And so to take on this step and relinquish that, it's huge.
You know, the one thing I was thinking is, like, what's the difference between control and managing? Because one of the previous steps says my life has become unmanageable, right?
Yeah.
So is there a difference between those? Like, I would assume if they're saying it has become unmanageable, that manageability is a good thing. So what's the difference between control and manageability?
In my mind, it's an extent, it's an extreme. A control is an extreme. A management would be that middle ground that we all want to potentially have, like that balance. Control is an extreme. Management is a balance.
Okay.
I like that. Yeah. More balanced.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking like because we know the step and we kind of have an understanding that maybe I think that we have a understanding that maybe we are a larger piece of the pie of the problem than some people might. I mean, when I was first getting sober, I was so disillusioned with the reality of the problem, right? Like I really hadn't thought that that I might be the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really thought that I just, I had gotten into such a psychosis that I thought, man, I kept hearing this, man, Ian Green, you have really horrible luck. And so I was being controlled by the idea that I have bad luck.
Mm.
That's it. That's all I legitimately thought. I'm like, oh, I can't, I probably shouldn't go do that because something bad's going to happen. But I ultimately did it anyway. And if something bad happened, I'd be like, oh, look, the world's out to get me. So for me, this step really was, like it said, being convinced
Mm-hmm.
that hey, this is another example. Like this, you really do play a part in everything that has happened. And for me, that was huge because I was like, oh wait, like, okay, I came to believe that that there's a problem, that there might be something out there that could help me, but what is the root of the problem that I'm looking for help for? And the root of the problem I started to realize was myself. That's what
Mm-hmm.
this step kind of brought to me. Then the fourth step was identifying, right,
I was
where
going to
those
Right.
say
are.
the third step bleeds perfectly into the fourth step, which
Mm-hmm.
obviously we'll talk about next. But I'm thinking about Ian, it takes a lot to also take that responsibility when you think that you have to understand and realize that you do have a certain responsibility in this. You can't play that victim card like, oh, this is just my bad luck,
Right,
or
Mm-hmm.
woe
right.
is me. It's easy to fall back on that because, again, I don't, like Katie, I don't want to go more into the third step, but when you look in that mirror, that's tough.
Do you mean
Yeah,
fourth
but
step?
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think she meant fourth step.
Yeah.
But
Fourth
um,
step, did I not say fourth step? The next step.
right.
Fourth step.
Yeah.
But also in that's what when I was talking about that opportunity in being able to get a map drawn out of what the fuck's going on. Like that was the first time in a long time that I actually felt like I knew where something was going or where I needed to maybe go, like a direction. And so in that, being told that, hey, you are the one that's creating these issues. Um, for me, it wasn't so much as a stressor that was potentially true. It was more so a relief. Like, oh, okay, like I at least know something to be true
Yeah.
because I'm starting to look at all this and I'm like, okay, this all starts to make sense.
The,
And that sometimes takes a long time.
yeah. This I think that I was more focused on letting go. Like I didn't have the mirror fully yet. I thought that I was still a victim of my childhood, of my parents, of my broken family, and everyone was out to get me, like you said, Ian. Like I couldn't trust anyone, but then I was too trusting. It was this weird dichotomy of just
Right.
like letting people walk all over me, having no boundaries, but like being like, what the fuck? Why does life always do this to me? And letting go and letting my higher power, whatever you call it, was kind of like this pressure release valve. Like I was like, okay, I can take some of this off of me because I felt like I was carrying everything because I would do that to myself.
Mm.
I was the one doing that to myself, but I wasn't quite looking at myself yet. So I was first looking to this. It showed me that and I had such a hang up with church and God. Like, I think that's why I got really focused on, like, I'm supposed to just trust that this weird mystery. I can't touch it. Like, I have to let it go and just trust. I think I got stuck on that a little bit, but it was not in a bad way. Um, I realized that I didn't have to go to church to find it and to connect to that higher power, and that the relationship was subjective and it was intimate and it was mine. And I began to trust myself more,
Mm.
because weirdly enough, I didn't trust myself at all. I trusted what everyone else wanted me to be, and then I became that person. And so I think I started to realize that that was a hard pill to swallow. Oh my God, I don't even trust myself. And I believe now that there's divinity, that intuition is a connection to a higher power, to my spiritual being, and trusting my gut when it's screaming and speaking that truth, and then saying, okay, I I'm just putting this out there. Like, this is how I feel. Take it. Let it go.
Mm.
Man, I got some stuff I'm wrestling with inside, so I'm gonna throw it out there because you guys have all cued it. I, there, the step is rubbing me the wrong way
Hmm.
because, and maybe this is just kind of the essence of the 12 steps I'm realizing I'm having a little bit of a tough relationship with. Um, I think it's easy to throw out that we're not victims. We are victims because a lot of us have grown up in households where there's a lot of abuse that happened. There's a lot of betrayal. We put our trust in certain people. Not only that, let me talk about the people who grew up in religious households and were told, basically had a God portrayed to them that was far from safe. It was this judgmental, abusive looking authority figure. And and I just think that, RhiAnnon, I like that you said there takes a lot of work because this step is like one of those things where there's just so much verbiage in there that is, to me, is kind of running over some of that stuff that has to be processed. Like that we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Well, what if you grew up understanding that God was this horrible thing that you have to basically deconstruct, which is happening in this deconstruction movement? So many people grew up with the Almighty Father and the lightning bolts throwing. So that's where I am. I don't have a point in what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, this is where I'm struggling with this whole thing because I tend to look at like all the trauma behind stuff, like where's the abuse and all
Right.
that, instead of like just taking this for its word.
I don't think we should diminish, or I don't want to diminish or discount that there are true victims, um, especially kids.
I tend to think our behavior is a symptom, by the way. How we
Is a what?
act is a symptom.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I don't believe in behavioral modification, because I think that's bullshit. You're not getting to the actual point. You're just trying to
You're putting
manage
a
some
Band-Aid.
It's a
stuff.
cry for help.
Yeah.
And
The
let me say this
behavior is the
too.
cry for help.
Let's not go so extreme on what I said in saying that I think there's a lot of people that play victims and aren't
Right.
victim to the thing that they're playing with. And that's where I understand that this is kind of where that is, which is like, stop, victimizing yourself in certain areas that you don't need to be, or like Ian said, like he just sort of relied on, why does shitty things just always happen to me? Like that's a pretty victimizing statement in itself, although there could be truth to that. But RhiAnnon, you were going to say something. You were wanted to jump in.
First thing, I'm thankful that you took over my perspective on this episode of having that God problem. Because I feel like what you just said is in essence how I just feel in general. But in working through these steps, because I've thought of this a lot because of that God part that is in these steps, I'm looking at the steps right now and I literally am putting my hand up. And I don't know if this is a self-preservation or defense mechanism, but I end my sentence for this step as made a decision to turn our will and lives over. Period. I don't want to define that. We talked about I want my higher power to be my plant, for goodness sakes. Like, so this is another thing that I've been thinking about with these steps. We can go so existential so easily because I think all of us are self-aware and we want to make progress, but we can also really dumb this down. And Ian, I think you're a great reminder of there are some people that when they're going through these steps of especially these first ones, life is chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to oversimplify, but I don't want to go to the extreme where we're nitpicking every single part. So again, I want to find that balance. But when we talk about control and we just make the decision to turn these things over, that is hard. That's hard wherever you are in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. And I think that I need to make this very clear. You know, before we even get to the steps in the big book, it's like 53 pages in before we even, or even more,
Steps. Yeah.
58 pages in before we even get to how it works. So before that, we have We Agnostics. And that talks about the dilemma of how do you conquer, how do you manipulate the idea, manipulate not by altering, but being able to handle the idea of the word God or higher power. So us going step by step in this podcast, we have somewhat skipped some of the precursor explanations and examples that help atheists, agnostics, people who are part of a religious background really, juggle that idea that, okay, I'm at a point now where I feel like I need something needs to change. And what do I want to move forward with? And like we talked about, we're going about this in an hour and a half hour each, and every week. I've been doing this for 12 years over and over and over again. And for me, it always is evolving. Like these steps are I'm always finding something new. I'm always changing it. So, to get to this step for you guys, some of you maybe who are listening who haven't ever read the big book or been involved, I can see how overwhelming it could be to just, okay, now decide to turn your will and your life over to something as you might not even understand him yet. Right? So it makes total sense.
I love what you just said. I vibrated when you talked about all the pages prior to it. Just to speak to our mass exodus crowd, our God seekers, our God deconstructors, all of that kind of stuff. What we're talking about of like just taking this step out of the context is exactly what people do with Bible verses. They take this one little Bible verse, they put it on their car, and they a lot of times don't have the context, the cultural context to it, the history around it. There's no prepping you to get to that place. So you just take these little verses and obey them, essentially. And so I love that you brought in that there's context behind all of this. There is some work that has to be done. You know what I mean?
Right.
Does that make sense to everybody?
It
I
makes
think totally.
perfect sense.
Yeah,
Totally.
absolutely.
I mean, a lot of, I see a lot of, and I'm going to use alcoholics because that's who I mostly see, but it could be anybody. I see a lot of alcoholics come to the program and either they are glazed over and zombied throughout the entire program because they haven't yet grasped their own belief of a higher power that they're willing to put faith into. And the word faith for a lot of religious folks is even a, oof, I don't want to deal with
It's a
that word.
trigger. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in the chapters before, which I think we should at some point touch on, you know, they talk about those situations, those issues that people of religious backgrounds and agnostic backgrounds and atheist backgrounds have to deal with and have to come to grips with in order to be able to do this step fearlessly. And that's unfortunately something that needs to happen in order for this to work. And for me, being an atheist growing up, that luck thing was all I had to grasp onto. I didn't believe that God was out to get me. I just always seemed to get caught by the police. What the fuck? So I had to do some major work because I really thought I was in control. Like you said, I really felt I was in control, and when something went wrong, it was either me or it was somebody else, and it wasn't usually me. So it was never me.
Like for the list, I am taking this very literal in my life. Like I'm really pondering on these and trying to apply them. And like we've already said, talking about these things in an hour and a half, there's no way we can touch on these. And there's a part of me that I try not to feel discouraged because all of these steps are still blending together for me. It's not like we're talking about step 3, and yet as I'm looking at them, I still think I need to go back to step 1 and think about that a little bit more. And it's that continuous work, that continuous progression. And Ian, I appreciate that you say, after 12 years, you look at these steps and you're in a different point in your life right now, and your perspective has changed from what it was in the beginning. And I don't think I have a point in what I'm saying right now. I'm just trying to connect with maybe some of our listeners who are out there who are feeling maybe a little overwhelmed and like, it's a lot.
Can I let me help you out with giving a few verbiage to what you just said, which is the 12 steps isn't a graduation program. We live in an achieving society where we think we accomplish something and then we move to the next level and then we accomplish. That's not what these 12 steps are.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not a level you're reaching. You're going, sometimes you need to step back. Much like the addict.
Oh, yeah.
You take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It goes in the rhythm of your life.
It's like a dance.
It's like a dance.
Right.
And I love that I haven't revisited the steps. I use the steps I use tools and portions of the steps daily to help me, because I still get stuck on all of the things that I used to get stuck on back then. But I love that this is bringing me back and I'm revisiting them. And like you said, I'm older now. Things have changed. I'm a mom, and it's a totally different, I'm wearing different lenses in certain aspects of my life. And, it's not a graduation, and you're not like cured once you're past all the steps. Like,
right.
I can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that's something that they bring up, hey, you might get the benefits of the program, right? Like you might become sober. You might start getting material things that you never could obtain before. You might be getting the relationships that you never were able to hang on to. Do not be deceived by your accomplishments. They are not yours, and they are fleeting. They can disappear in a second.
That
Never
is so
take
heavy.
for granted what you fucking got, because as soon as you do so, they use the word alcohol is cunning and baffling.
Yeah.
I mean, and what I even put in that is selfishness is cunning and baffling, because I'm a selfish motherfucker. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I'm a piece of shit if I don't have people around me to help me keep me on track.
First of
call
all,
you out,
don't
keep you
talk
accountable.
about my friend Ian like that, because I don't think he's a piece of shit.
No.
But I
well,
100%
Selfishness.
agree with having those people around you to be held accountable. And Ian, you know, after our podcast on the first step, I was struggling a lot, and you gently reminded me of that. Like, we can't placate ourselves with it's going to be okay, or not taking that responsibility. Like, when we become, what's the word I'm looking for? Complacent, that is not going to do anybody of benefit. And so, and I guess as I'm saying this, I think about what we were just talking about, this as being a graduate program. Like, I don't mean to say that you always have to move towards a finish line, but in my mind, and I talk about this in therapy, I always need to be moving forward to feel progress. And it is hard, like what you just said, like you're moving forward, but then some days it's, I just took a step back.
right.
But we
think
have to also come to terms with that.
we do. I mean, um, you know, I talked about this in an earlier podcast. My sponsor explained to me that maybe how I was trying to do the steps, maybe how I was trying to do a graduate program, wasn't how I needed to go about it. Maybe I was doing the steps, utilizing the tools on a day-to-day basis, but I wasn't allowing myself to see that, or wanting to come to terms with, maybe I do need to take a step back and really understand, oh, I'm trying to do something for somebody else. I'm not doing it for me. And I think that the program is very aggressive with the selfishness thing, because alcoholics are selfish. They are so selfish. Addicts are so selfish. I could care less if you're my mom or my dad or my sister or my wife. I'm going to treat you like shit. And I'm going to take advantage of you, and you're going to get hurt. That's just how it works. And to forget that in our day-to-day lives is something that I don't think that this book was willing to do.
So I'm going to repeat myself from earlier, because I'm stuck on what you just said, which is there, behind that selfishness, there is a lot of history. We don't just become selfish overnight and now we're just selfish. How do you acknowledge that selfishness without repeating a pattern of beating yourself up or being so like, because you can just repeat a pattern in that. Like, some people had the shit kicked out of them growing up. They became drinkers because they had a parent who drank and did that, and they're probably repeating that pattern in some way. And just to go, I'm selfish and I need to move forward, I don't think is doing anything besides just repeating a horrible pattern.
This just to remind you, this isn't the last step either. We move in, you know, right? We move into
3.
we move into the next step, which is identifying what legitimately is our part and what isn't our part.
Right.
How do we juggle with that? So it's this step isn't necessarily about, hey, you're the problem. You've always been the problem. Period. Right. You know, that's kind of a playback, and I can see why you're having an issue with this, is because I sense that the religious tonality is that you are the problem, and in order to fix that problem, you need to fix yourself, or you need to turn your will and your life over to God, right?
And be worthy of a God who shames.
Right.
Like, you're not worthy. But that's not, and like what Rob said, the drinking is a symptom many times, almost, I'd say, in my opinion, 99.9%, is a symptom of other trauma. And like, yes, I hear and see how it would feel like hold the phone. Like, this isn't the whole freaking story. You're not the bad guy, and having to be like, I'm not worthy, please save me. This the shaming God. I can see how that would be an overtone.
Yeah, and I think that something important to take on is that this is a massive ball of yarn, right? And for somebody who's potentially been in oblivion for X amount of years, or been so confused that they don't know what's up from down, being able to delineate between what are contributing factors to my symptoms in which I utilize alcohol to numb is so intellectually deep and complex that it's almost a disservice to those who are coming into the program trying to get through some of those crazy emotions. It's easier, and I think it's only really what I'm trying to say is that each person that comes into the program really only has the mental faculties to take on what is theirs first and foremost. Like, I have to take on my piece because I can't start to decipher what other people's pieces were
Yes.
or are, right?
Right.
So I think that that's the point of this step is, hey, take on what you can, which is you, and the rest will follow. You will start to understand the other people,
It's a therapy tool in some ways, because when you go into a therapist's office, you're probably not bringing all the people that have affected you in your life. You're just going in, you're like, time to work on me, which is kind of how
you would hope. Yeah.
I would
Right?
say.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the 12-step program is it is a chance or it's an opportunity to stop blaming everything on everybody else and say, hey, I want to get better. I think I just don't like it when I hear somebody say, and to get better is to put these blanket statements on me and beat the shit out of myself to say, oh, I'm a piece of shit. I've just been doing this. That doesn't get anywhere to me. And so I think I think that's so great. You guys brought so much context to that, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and
It's
I
a
have
big
to.
old onion.
It is, and from an alcoholic, the sentiment that I put behind me being the issue is maybe has a little bit more weight than other people might, right? Because there is a symptom to which I need to stay. I need to stay away from that, and in order for me to stay away from that, that's how I'd stay away from it, is knowing that I cannot be the one in control, and that bad things happen when I'm in control. That my brain is legitimately trying to kill me, separate me from my fellows, isolate me, tells me I'm not XYZ, all those things. So, and I have to remember, where do those things come from? Okay, they're probably fear-based. Okay, well then where are those fears coming from? They're coming from, I'm afraid I'm not going to make enough money. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to be good enough for these people to like me enough to keep me around. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to, get this job. And at the root of all of those things, unfortunately, is a selfish, for me at least, is a selfish core. And it's not a selfishness like, hey, you did these maliciously, you're a piece of shit. No, it's just, hey, these are normal, common things that everyone wants. But maybe you're playing the game by somebody else's rules and somebody else's tempo. And hey, you just need to realize that, okay, you might be trying to get these things and they're not ready. They're not for you right now. I don't think of being selfish as a bad thing, honestly. I think of it as, okay, I'm identifying an obstacle. Okay, now what tools can I utilize to overcome these obstacles? That's how I think about it, to be honest.
Part of I just want to clarify something, that part of my being a little stickler during this time of like making sure is knowing our audience. And I know, like, we have to understand that the word selfish for a lot of people who are in church has a lot of like stuff under it,
Right.
because
See, like, I don't have that. I have
Right.
Exactly. Right. So
Totally.
totally.
Yeah.
I'm totally grateful that you're bringing
the
this point up.
typical, I think RhiAnnon probably her version of God, as we've talked about in the past, probably has this as well. Saying you're selfish within the church context was pretty common to say, but it didn't address everything. That's what I'm trying to say. So,
Right.
so it's important to put background to all of this and to meet people where they're at. So when I hear Ian say, because I'm a selfish prick, I can understand that that's not you just beating yourself up, but you doing a lot of work at looking at your life.
Yeah. So it's trying to be rigorously honest.
Yes.
And I throw out those terms in a nonchalant kind of in your face way. That's just because that's how I do it. It's not anything to do with, you know, self-loathing or anything that is connotated with the religious parameter. It's and I'm sorry if I, you know, created some confusion there. I just am trying to be rigorously honest with myself and transparent with myself at all times.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and by folks who have pre-existing belief systems that might have been indoctrinated in them, or a lack thereof. There is a lot of work that needs to happen before these steps can really be taken seriously. You know, so I just want to reiterate that, you know, even just the word God, I mean, it's said a lot in this book. The word him is incorporated in this book. But also in this book, they also take the time and beautifully explain that that is not their intent. Their intent is to allow you to come to whatever it is that you want to come to, whether it be tiny, you know, large or small. So I just, yeah.
Be also understand. I want to get to RhiAnnon because I see you're having a reaction, and we only get views out of reactions. So that was a joke. But I will say we also don't want to forget the community aspect behind these steps, and the fact that a lot of times we do this with the company of community, which hopefully, if you're in a good, healthy community, it's challenging you not to just be about you, not to just be in an unnecessary way. But that, yes, there's a spotlight on you as you're doing these 12 steps, but you're not alone sitting in a room. You have, that's such an important key to this. And that's what bums me out. Sometimes when I hear people who have like left church, is they leave church and then they just like go off into a desert on their own. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly the best thing either. Like, there is some time. Anyway, there's an AA aspect to this that I don't want to forget, that there's a support community. RhiAnnon, what's going on with you, girl?
Well, first, like what you just said, I don't want to take away from what we're talking about with these steps, because it's important. For me, these steps just are hitting so much deeper than, and that doesn't even sound right, because struggling with an addiction or struggling with that is deep. Ian, I don't like to hear you say, I'm a piece of shit. You've said it twice now, and I'm hung up on it, and I don't like it. I just want to put that out there.
Understood.
And I think to myself, because I say that to myself a lot, that it's tough love. And I need to, I need to buck up, and I need to take on that responsibility. But, and I say this almost every day, I feel like now, when one of my friends said to me, don't talk about my friend RhiAnnon like that. And I don't like to hear you say things like that.
I will say this. there is a delineation between beating yourself up and not having a path to go afterwards, and versus identifying some real things about yourself and then having a path with a community to legitimately work through it.
And I think that's where that responsibility part comes in, because we all have made mistakes. And I think this next step that we're going to talk about is going to be a very hard one for me. But when we look at that mirror, Ian, I don't think of you as being that word selfish. Like, I don't know you a lot. I get we've still become very new friends, but in your heart of hearts, it's not your goal to hurt people.
No, no, and that's
I
something
think
that
what's
yeah, go ahead now. Go ahead, Katie.
sorry to interrupt.
No, no, please do.
I think what Ian is tapping into is something that you feel in the rooms of AA and Al-Anon and within the community is there is so much humor around, and sometimes it's self-deprecating,
Right.
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
really, really fucking hard, dark
Right.
truths, parts of our stories. And I think that the piece of shit comment, the whole room would have erupted with laughter. Like in when people tell their stories and stuff, they say self-deprecating things, and you know that there are parts of our stories that where we're kind of shitty because part of the human experience. And I think that's what is the humor aspect
Right.
of dealing with the really hard fucking truths and parts of people's stories. I think that's what he was hitting, but it felt different for us. Maybe.
I think this goes with our perspective of where we're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling with that. I'm
Yeah.
struggling with negative talk, and I hear it and it triggers me because I'm trying to give selfish for our listeners. I'm using air quotes because that word selfish, like Rob has said, being selfish in the church, it's sinful. Let's be real. Like it's a sin to be selfish from where I come from. I'm going to hell. Not that Jehovah's Witnesses believe in hell, but
Right.
so I'm one, having to adjust my definition of selfish, and I'm two, having to learn to love myself. And I trigger, and I had that reaction when you said those things about yourself, because right now I'm struggling with those are very hard things to say. And I understand that is self-deprecating and there's a little bit of a dark humor on that, but that's also been my defense mechanism of brushing myself off.
Right.
And so right now, I'm very sensitive that I can't keep telling myself that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that like a single word in the English language has multiple meanings. I think that this phrase at different points can mean something completely different for each one of us. And for me, like Katie had said, you know, alcoholics and addicts, we've done some really horrible things. Even just individuals have done some really horrible things. So to to make certain that your explanation, I mean, for you, it does hurt. For me, it's a reminder of, okay, there's some problems that I need to work through, and a reminder that I need to continue working these problems with my fellows, because that's how I feel like that's how I can be this person to you, that you don't think of me as a piece of shit. Right?
This is okay. So here's what's happening. Just I'm stepping back. This is the beauty of community, because he said something that triggered you, RhiAnnon, and you get a chance to look at you because of this. You identified that. You said when you hear the piece of shit thing, that is in his own context very different than what you're going through. And that's the beauty of community. This is a little 4-person community here. We
Right.
should be having that reaction because we're being vulnerable with each other. You know, there was so much genuineness in you saying you don't want to see
I know. I know.
Ian beating
I
himself
love
up.
that.
I'm happy about that.
And that's great.
that.
But this is the point, is it's giving us all an opportunity to react with each other, which puts the spotlight back on us. And I think that that's a really, really good thing.
I actually think this is also the perfect segue of going into our next step. This is going to be tough when you look in that mirror.
Right.
And
sure.
finishing on this note of our mirror is all going to look different for everybody.
Yes.
For sure.
And it's going to be hard because, Ian, like you just said, we do shitty things sometimes. And moving into step 4 and taking that inventory, I think our next episode is, like always, it's going to be pretty heavy.
Yeah.
It's gonna be
And I think there's going to
I'm
be
use it as
some
comedy. I'm using it as
I
comedy.
think there's going to be some self-deprecation and dark humor in
Honestly,
there.
that's
That's
how
how the bits I'm trying to work
that's
out.
part of it. No,
Sometimes that's how
part
you
of
have to
it.
get through it, is you have to
Yeah.
be a little hard on yourself, but it's just like, okay, I've got to make light of this or else I'm going to kill myself.
Yes. You're
That's
right.
legitimately sometimes how it goes.
I think it's the balance. It
Yeah.
has to be part of it.
Right.
Yeah. So
Well-
Rob, like you said, wrapping this up, stay tuned for next time, right? Ian, what do you think?
Oh, I think that's perfect. I think step
I just
4.
stole the host.
No, I love it because it's like a perfect segue. I love it. No, I think step 3, like we mentioned, step 3 is none of these steps, as you hear them in succession, need to be completed by the next step. You know, maybe don't listen to the podcast for a couple weeks until you've kind of worked through some of the other things. I would suggest maybe reading the big book if you haven't read the big book, like we talked about. Page 48 or
I'm
58.
going to say that first 53 pages.
There's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of stuff there. So anyway, thank you guys for coming on this journey. And sorry for calling myself a piece of shit, RhiAnnon. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Don't say that ever again, sir.
I'm a sad piece of
Poop.
human poop.
This is the shit, man. This is why we're going on 12 episodes of the 12 steps. We just spent an hour going through sludge and all of that stuff, man. We just started, like you said. So, yeah.